Hey everyone, my name is Penny Zanker, and it's time to reset. This podcast goes beyond just navigating change. It's about new ways of thinking about how you can approach challenges, how you can shift your mindset when needed, create some space and grace for yourself so that you can rethink, recharge, and reprioritize when and where needed. Are you ready to unlock your full potential? Thank you for hitting play and sharing this next episode with me. It's time to reset. Hello and welcome to Take Back Time. My name is Penny Zanker and I'm your host. And I'm excited today to have Mark Herschberg with us. He is the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. From tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems, that's pretty interesting. Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500s and in academia as well. He's helped to start the undergraduate practice opportunities program dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, where he teaches annually. At MIT, he received a BS in physics, a BS in electrical engineering and computing and science, and a M.Eng. So that's probably mechanical engineer, I would guess, an M.Eng in electrical engineering and computer science. Oh my God, what doesn't this guy do? What is an M.Eng?
Master's in engineering.
Master's in engineering. So you are an underachiever. Mark helped to create a platform used to teach finance at prominent business schools. And he also works with many nonprofits currently serving on the board of Plant a Million Corals. Anyway.
There's a lot of big words in my bio.
I'll tell you, that's a mouthful, but clearly you're pretty accomplished there. So Mark, I'm excited to chat with you about what you've got going.
Well, thanks for having me on the show today. It's my pleasure to be here.
You know, and on this show, we're looking to help people to work smarter, right? To not just think about how they can work smarter, but actually put it into practice. And so we talked about focusing on, you've got a lot that you could talk about in your background, but we said we would focus on helping people to manage their managers, because when they want to build their career, you talk a lot about career development, that's a key factor. And it's a key factor to success in any organization and also to our sanity at work. So what about this topic, managing your manager, is important to you?
When we think about our careers and the many skills we need, we think about leadership, communication, networking, negotiations, all very important. But hidden among them are the unwritten rules of the workplace. And that falls under the umbrella of managing our manager and fitting into the culture. And knowing or not knowing how to do this can make or break your job and even your career. And it's not something we teach. There was no class on this back in college. So often we figure it out only by stumbling.
That is so true. And who wants to stumble, right? In terms of, I'd much rather know how it works. So, you know, there is this like unconscious, like there's this culture that we all know in the organization that the organization fosters. But then there's that underlying culture, that communication culture that is unspoken. So how do you uncover that? Like maybe people are going, I don't understand. You know, our values are integrity and, you know, productivity and profitability. And that's what they understand as their company culture. Maybe how do we dig deeper into that to understand what that unwritten layer of culture is?
So let's first understand what it is, and we can talk about how to find it. And
Okay.
you're right. Many companies, especially big ones, somewhere on the website, they have, these are our corporate values. I saw a Fortune 500 company spend 2 years making sure every employee went through their little indoctrination program to learn those values.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the way the company actually worked. I have a friend, not the company I just referred to, the Fortune 500, but a friend once said at his company, the way decisions got made is the loudest voice wins. Mm-hmm. That's it. I guarantee you that was not on their website. But everyone knew when you're in the meeting, you just scream longer and louder, and eventually others give up, and that's how you get your way. And that's the unwritten culture. Mm. There are companies who believe in open debate. That's something I like on my team. So I'm very explicit with this with my team. When we're in a meeting, If you don't agree with what someone says, disagree, including, and especially me, challenge my ideas. I like that.
Right.
There are other corporate cultures, and some of this comes actually from different global cultures, where you don't do that. You don't say in the meeting, I think that's a bad idea. Instead, you will privately address it. In some organizations, in fact, the meetings are effectively for show, and the real decisions happened earlier. In fact, examples of this, we see this with Congress. The debate they have on the floor, that's all for show. That's for publicity. The real decision-making on whether a bill would pass or not, that happened in the backroom meetings, K Street on L Street. That's where decisions get made. Likewise, we know at some universities, when you defend your PhD, you're there, you're nervous, you don't know if you're going to get it. While at other ones, you've already spoken to all your advisors, you've met their objections, and this is ceremonial. There's not a right or wrong culture, but it's important to understand the culture, because if you're behaving for the wrong culture, you're not going to be effective.
Right. And it could kill your career. Right.
Exactly.
In the context, I've heard, people challenge their leadership and in a way to develop a better solution, and they were shown the door, because that's just not the way things are done there. Even if they have across their open communication, right, as a value, they may live it in a very different way. And that's leader per leader can be very, very different.
Well said. So the culture can actually be in conflict with the written culture. Yes, we value your input and open communication, but do they really?
Right. And sometimes it's a team culture, right? That the corporate culture is one thing, and they're trying to establish an overarching corporate culture. But in large organizations, very often there's a team culture that revolves around the leadership and what that leadership is creating.
Very true. In fact, we see this very commonly. I am an engineer by training. I work with lots of engineering teams. We even see in how the teams engage with each other. Engineers are notorious for loving Slack. It's an instant messaging tool. Probably more people are familiar with it now that we've been working from home. Engineers will be sitting right next to each other, but talk to each other on Slack. You do everything in the chat. They live and die on Slack. Others in the company tend not to use Slack as much. What happens when you have engineers and non-engineers try to communicate? The engineer says, oh, you sent me an email? I check that once every 3 days. If you want me, message me on Slack.
Right.
The other person's thinking, oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that, but I never use it. And so you have a difference in culture across teams, which could cause problems and discontinuity as well.
So how do I discover, what that unwritten culture is within my team? And how do I work within that? So let's take a scenario, right? And you can help me. So I get a lot of people who say that they're overwhelmed and overloaded, with the workload that they have. And so part of that is, how do they speak up? How do they communicate with their leader or with project leaders that they're overloaded when they feel like, well, if I say anything, I'm going to lose my job? Like, how do they identify the culture, and then how do they communicate within that culture?
The best time to do it is before you take the job. And we'll talk about that, but then we'll talk about what to do once you're there. During the interview process, there are a number of questions you as a candidate should ask, or you as a hiring manager should bring up as well, to make sure you're on the same page. Because again, we're not saying one culture is necessarily better than another. Some maybe, but others you can say they're equally good, but you want to make sure you have that cultural fit. And on the resources page of my website at thecareertoolkitbook.com/resources, I have a list of those questions. And if you read the blog post, the way to bring them up is to say, hey, listen, before we get to the offer stage, or now we have the offer, I read this really great blog post by this guy named Mark Herschberg, and he says we should discuss this. You can blame me for doing this, because it can be awkward to bring it up. Like, oh, I want to ask. We go, hey, Mark Herschberg said. So you can put the blame on me. It's a good way to break the ice and broach this topic. And you want to ask questions about decision-making, about communication, about culture, and look for examples, not just the words. Because remember, when we're candidates, what happens? We say, oh, I'm really good at running teams that are growing in size. And what does the hiring manager say? Well, give me an example. Show me how. Don't just tell me. I want to see proof. We can ask the same thing, obviously politely. So if they say, oh, we really value employee input, that's wonderful to hear. Can you give me an example of 3 things that you implemented because of employee input. Ask them to provide the proof. So we want to have this conversation ideally while we're hiring someone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but for many of us, well, we're in it now. We're not in jobs. How do we start to broach these topics? One thing to do is to create guidelines, especially if you're onboarding someone. You can start by saying, hey, you know what, as we bring Jill on next week, I'd really like to write up ideas for her on how she can be effective, especially today in the hybrid workplace and the virtual workplace where you're just not around. It's harder to learn by watching others because we're not together.
Watch.
Hey, you know what? And again, you can blame Mark Herschberg for this. We need to be more explicit with how these things work. So I want to start writing it down. Can I write something and get input from others? Now, you still might not broach certain topics like, hey, we all know the loudest person wins. Your boss might not want to hear that's the culture that she or he set. But some of these other topics, like we all like to use Slack, or it's important to really bring up topics prior to the meeting. That tends to be how we work. Let's be more explicit about them.
Right. I 100% agree that onboarding is absolutely, I recently saw some statistics. I wish I could remember exactly, but it was something like 60 to 70% of employees were deciding on the future with that company based on their onboarding, and that there were some specific things that were really important to them on the onboarding and setting goals and understanding the guidelines and standards and the way the company works and having access to leaders was absolutely critical. So I'm 100% with you on the criticality of onboarding. But my question really, and I want to come back to it, it's for that employee, right? So forget they've been long onboarded. They have been with the organization for 2 or 3 years, let's say. And slowly over time, budgets have been cut. They're doing the work of 1.5 to 2 people. As many people are seeing because, of the pandemic, that there's potentially more work that's falling upon them. And they're not, and this is why we are, 63% of people are experiencing burnout symptoms, right now. So how did they handle those discussions with their managers, managing their managers, so that they can alleviate some of the stress that they're feeling and be able to cope with the current workload that they have?
You may be able to directly speak to your manager about her or his personal style or the team style. And in fact, one thing I do when I join a company, I go, hi, everyone, my name is Mark, and I introduce myself to my team. I'm very explicit about expectations. Here's how you can bring things to my attention. I do want you to disagree with me. I set what the ground rules are. And whenever I hire someone, I'm explicit with that new hire. Here are my expectations. That's something as hiring managers we can do. Now, in this case of you're not the hiring manager, you're trying to get this from your manager.
Right.
If you don't have the relationship where you can say, hey, can we sit down and want to go over expectations? This is where you do it as part of the onboarding process. You say, whether Jill's coming on next week or you say for when we hire someone, I want to get this set so we have it for the future. So now you're not saying I'm going to you because I have an issue. You're saying, hey, I'm doing something that's helping the team, but it opens the door to this conversation. And again,
so you're doing it in the guise of helping someone else who's new, who's starting. Let's get some of these things down and clarified. So
exactly. You can say,
that's a cool way to do it.
Suggests we create this document, blame me, right. And that gets you doing it without raising any feathers.
Right. That's a cool way to do it. And I think today, people going back into the office or doing this, newly into the hybrid, I think we have a change that could give that opportunity or that excuse to bring that up again and say, okay, look, now that our working situation has changed somewhat, let's sit down and reevaluate and rediscuss, the expectations and how we handle the workload and how we communicate certain things. I think whenever you get an opportunity or an excuse to bring it up and have a check-in, I think that we should always look to take advantage of that so that we can kind of reset expectations, reset the way that we're working together. I'm a big fan of continual resetting to make sure that we're growing and focusing forward together based on where the circumstances are today.
And you're right that certainly if you're at one of these inflection points of we're all going back to the office or we're going back part-time, I have a blog post on this very topic that we need to be explicit in the rules for the new normal. When we all went virtual in March of 2020, it was so quick. We just said, okay, we're shift and we don't know how long this will be. And we're making it up as we went. But now it's a lot more intentional. We're intentionally bringing people back to the office 2, 3, 5 days a week. Let's be explicit about what that means. And especially if we're not there 5 days a week, we need to be more explicit in what's happening because not everyone is there to see it. We can't all learn by having that shared experience in the office. So being explicit helps. And anyone in HR should be saying, yes, we need to do this across the company at the company level, but then at the individual department levels as well.
What do you think is one of the biggest myths when it comes to managing your manager?
I would say that they are opaque, that they're hard to understand. Most managers very clearly signal what their values are. There might be some who seem capricious, but if you really pay attention to their motivation, now it could be they just listen to the last person to speak to them. Okay, well, that's their value. And you just have to recognize it's a timing issue. So, and in fact, with managers, here's a technique you could try. This is one that we teach in negotiations. It's the would you rather question. When we negotiate with someone, some people say, well, I don't know if, do you want, they don't know if it's really about the money or about the timing. So I can say, would you rather a lower price or would you rather earlier delivery? And I give them the choice because now they're going to show by their preference what their values are. Absolutely. With your manager, if your manager isn't going to be pinned down, say, would you prefer that I send this to you in an email before we meet about, or just want me to come by and walk you through it? Give them that would you rather choice, and that will allow them to express their preferences.
That's a great suggestion because that still puts the choice back in their hands. But like you said, you get clarity on the values. And I think for that same person that I said was overwhelmed by so many different things coming at them, that would you rather is a perfect as well. Would you rather me do this or would you rather me do this? That at the current moment in my priorities, I need a clarification as which one is more important for you or has the greater impact. And then that'll give you some feedback on that as well. And then you can have a discussion about that. If you'd rather me do this, I'm happy to take this on. Just so you know, that means that this is going to need to be put back until tomorrow or next week, right? So that would you rather opens up the potential for that conversation so that people can then, reset the priorities with their managers.
Now, there is an edge case I'll bring up, and this is a personal story. I had a new CEO, and I showed up, and the CEO berated me a few weeks in saying, why don't you have a plan for this project? I said, oh, I'm sorry. I thought the consultant's plan, the vendor, they provided a plan my first week that they'd been working on for months. The plan made sense to me. I thought it was good. But do you want me to have my own plan? I said, yes, you need to provide a plan. Okay, no problem. I will come up with a plan. Just so we're clear, what are you looking for? Do you want some prose write-up, some Word document? Are you looking for a budget and timeline? Do you want me to give you a PowerPoint? I want to understand what you're looking for. So I gave him a would you rather with a few choices. He just, I don't know. I don't know. Now, at that point, I knew this was not going to work because if my manager cannot give me, in this case, his preference, then the odds that I'm going to meet it were pretty slim. Right. And that's a sign it's time to leave.
Right. Or it could be that I agree with you in that context is that's why you ask those questions. And for those who are listening, I just want to highlight how important those questions are that you ask, because many people would just say, okay, I'll go away and I'll do a plan. They stay in a state of assumption and they make all these assumptions about what is being expected or what is wanted of them in terms of timing. Like, when do they need that plan by? What is it that they want in that plan? What's most important to them? And I think we get afraid to ask questions like, oh, well, maybe they'll think I'm stupid. I don't know what I'm doing, or they'll think that I'm not bringing the initiative. But I think it's just the opposite. When we ask questions, we're getting that clarity. We're knowing what's important to the people that we're working with, whether it's a client, whether it's a manager. And I think that we need to take back our, our question asking authority, right? The authority to ask questions because we're really putting ourselves in our position that we're not managing our manager if we're not asking those questions.
Exactly. The only time you'd ever get in trouble is if there's a clear policy, if your boss has said, this report, your weekly report always needs to be in by Friday. And this has been the rule for months. And you ask, by the way, when does it due? Like Friday. This has been clear for months.
Right. Well, that might not be the right question, but if they're overloaded and the boss has given them 15 other things to do that they've stated as a priority, I absolutely endorse that somebody says, hey, listen, this is what you've given me to do this week. And I just want you to know that if we're going to make sure that this report is done on Friday, then we're going to have to only be able to do 2 of these other 5 things. And then open up the door to say, would this, if you wanted it to be an exception, that this was done on Tuesday or something else, right? So you could still open the door to say that maybe this report, if it's not as important as this thing, that it could be pushed off or eliminated or whatever the case be for situation.
Right. So anytime it's new or different or an exception, we should always feel empowered because it's not the standard practice. Even in your example, the standard practice, but in unique circumstances, we have so many other things this week, something has to slip. So anytime it's slightly different, feel free to ask.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. So is there anything else that you feel when it comes to manager that we haven't covered yet that you think is really essential that people know?
There's a whole bunch of other things we can get into, but simply to recognize that when you think about our training, when you think about what we learned in school, for example, they taught us how to do accounting, how to do chemistry. On the test, they said, here is the answer box, put your answer here. And that's how we were trained. But that's not how it works in the real world. There's a whole bunch of other things, and we were never even taught to think this way. We were just taught to answer the question given, but we have to be more proactive in asking our own questions, whether it's would you rather, or just understanding how your boss or how your team likes to behave and making sure you adapt to that particular culture.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being here.
Thanks for having me on the show.
And where can people, what's the best website for them to go to find out more about you and your resources?
You can go to my website, thecareertoolkitbook.com. There you can see where to buy the book, follow me on social media, or get in touch with me for speaking or other things. You can also see more content on the blog page. And then there is a free app. I know you have one as well, because reading a book or listening to a podcast, it's a good start. But if you want to make that time efficient, you want to have some type of recall of the content. I know your app and my app provides that. So free app from the Android and iPhone store, link from the website. And then the resources page has a number of free resources, including the questions you should be asking during that interview process about the culture. So all of this is available at thecareertoolkitbook.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you all for being here. And, whether you have a manager or not, right? This is about communication. It's about asking questions. It might just be in the way you manage your customer and the way you manage your clients or the way you manage your kids, right? This is applicable. Strategies are cross-contextual. So think about if you took nothing more away than just the empowering yourself to ask those questions, to gain clarity, to be able to reset the expectations and to create clear priorities that are communicated. If just that, right, that's a way to manage your manager. It's a way to manage your kids. It's a way to manage your customers. So whoever you're managing, even if you're managing yourself, use that technique to be able to help you to work smarter. So that's today's show. My name is Penny Zinker, and this is Take Back Time. I'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thank you for spending this time with me. It really means a lot. If you're feeling a little off, distracted, overwhelmed, stuck, or just out of sync, remember that's your signal to reset. And that's all it takes, just recognizing one reset moment at a time. So stay tuned for more tips, tools, tricks, stories, strategies, all here on Time to Reset. We'll see you in the next episode.